On a crispy October morning in 1735, in the modest town of Braintree, Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Adams entered the world. The second day of that month, October 30th by the old Julian calendar, marked his beginning in a land still bound to the British crown but stirring with colonial independence. Born into a family neither destitute nor wealthy, he was the son of John Adams Sr., a farmer, shoemaker, and deacon, and Susanna Boylston Adams, whose lineage tied to a respected Massachusetts family. The boy's arrival was not heralded with grandeur, yet it carried the quiet weight of potential, as though the soil of Braintree itself whispered a promise of history yet to be written. The early Adams household reflected the colonial condition, pious, industrious, and shaped by the stern influence of Puritan tradition. Young John grew in a world where survival demanded diligence, and faith provided explanation for hardship. Yet, unlike many destined to remain bound to the plow, Adams revealed a restless mind and appetite for knowledge. His father, practical yet attentive, urged him toward education, recognizing his son's capacity for thought as a resource more enduring than land. Adams's early schooling took place under local teachers, where he absorbed the fundamentals of Latin, arithmetic, and scripture. But young John did not submit easily to authority or rote memorization. He grew impatient with poor instruction and questioned the rigidity of lessons. Even then, the stubbornness that would define his adult character revealed itself. At age 10, he often preferred hunting and fishing to the tedium of books, and he doubted whether scholarly life was worth the sacrifice of freedom in the fields. His father, however, intervened with firm direction, steering him toward preparation for Harvard College. Reluctant though he was at first, Adams applied himself, realizing the path before him might elevate him beyond the confines of Braintree. At 16, Adams entered Harvard, an institution of both religious training and intellectual rigor. The college served as a forge, where colonial youth were molded into ministers, magistrates, or leaders. Here, Adams encountered a broader horizon of ideas, classical philosophy, rhetoric, and law. He graduated in 1755, not yet certain of his vocation, but certain that the cultivation of the mind would define his future. In his journals, begun as a young scholar, he recorded his thoughts with a candor and intensity that foreshadowed the lifelong habit of reflection. His words revealed a man already wrestling with ambition, morality, and the weight of destiny. The Massachusetts into which Adams matured was itself a place of contradictions. Deeply loyal to Britain, yet increasingly conscious of its own strength, prosperous in trade, yet burdened by taxes and regulation. As Adams completed his studies, the French and Indian War erupted, drawing young men into battle and altering the balance of power in North America. Though Adams did not fight, the conflict framed his sense of a world where empires clashed and colonies served as pawns. He observed and he thought, and he prepared to carve his own place within that tumult. By 20, Adams accepted a position as a schoolmaster in Worcester, a role that tested his patience but clarified his ambition. The classroom was confining, the pupils often unruly, and he felt his talents strained in vain. Yet, it was here, amid ink-stained desks and restless boys, that Adams fixed upon his future. The law, he concluded, offered a profession where reason, eloquence, and justice converged. The decision set him on the path to legal study, guided by attorney James Putnam, who became his mentor. With law books open before him, Adams found the discipline that balanced his restless energy. His career, and his destiny, was about to take shape. John Adams stepped away from Worcester's classroom and into the world of legal apprenticeship with renewed purpose. Under James Putnam's guidance, he immersed himself in the study of Blackstone's commentaries and the principles of English common law, absorbing the intricacies of a system that balanced precedent, custom, and reason. His mind, disciplined by study, sharpened into an instrument of advocacy, and his ambition took clearer shape. Admission to the bar came in 1758, a moment that transformed him from a restless young scholar into a practitioner of law. Returning to Braintree, Adams established his practice, though clients at first came slowly. The colony was not short of lawyers, and he lacked reputation, but his diligence, honesty, and unrelenting preparation began to distinguish him. Adams approached each case with intellectual rigor, regardless of its size, demonstrating a seriousness that built trust. His writings from this period reveal a man deeply concerned with virtue and public responsibility, believing the lawyer must not merely serve for profit, but stand as a guardian of justice. The 1760s brought an awakening across the colonies, and Adams, like many, could not ignore the growing tension between Britain and its subjects. The ascension of King George III marked a new era of imperial control, and Parliament sought revenue through measures that would reach directly into colonial pockets. The Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765 rattled Massachusetts, and Adams' voice began to rise in defense of colonial rights. He published essays that blended legal reasoning with impassioned warnings, arguing that Parliament's taxation without representation violated the rights of Englishmen. His pen, as sharp as his tongue, made him a rising figure in public discourse. In 1764, another decisive event shaped his life: his marriage to Abigail Smith. She was intelligent, perceptive, and unafraid to match her husband's intensity with her own. Their union became not merely a partnership of affection, but a meeting of minds. Through years of separation, through war and politics, Abigail's letters and presence would anchor Adams, providing counsel and perspective that often steadied his turbulent spirit. Together, they settled into the modest home in Braintree that would later become a site of historic reverence. Adams' career surged forward with the Stamp Act crisis. Though others took to the streets, he wielded his talents through argument and persuasion. His writings under pseudonyms stirred debate, asserting that liberty could not coexist with arbitrary power. He was not a firebrand in the mold of Samuel Adams, his distant cousin, but his intellect lent legitimacy to resistance. He understood the law, and he could dismantle the claims of imperial authority with precision. By the close of the decade, Adams's reputation had expanded beyond Massachusetts. He was known as a lawyer of integrity, a writer of force, and a thinker deeply engaged with the crisis of empire. He had not yet ascended to the heights of leadership, but his path was clear. The colonies stirred toward greater defiance, and Adams, with his pen ready and his conviction steady, would soon step from the courtroom into the councils of revolution. The Boston Massacre defense had proven John Adams's integrity, but it also tethered him more deeply to the storm that swept across Massachusetts. The colonies seethed under Britain's tightening grip, and as committees, assemblies, and conventions multiplied, Adams' talents were drawn away from private practice into public service. By 1770, his name carried weight among those shaping resistance, though he still wrestled with ambivalence, for Adams feared mob violence as much as tyranny. Yet the tide of events demanded choices, and he chose to stand with his countrymen against the empire. The years following the massacre were charged with urgency. The Tea Act of 1773 and the dramatic protest of the Boston Tea Party set Massachusetts ablaze with defiance. Adams, though not in the harbor on that December night, defended the act as a statement of principle against monopoly and coercion. Britain's retaliation came swiftly with the coercive acts, designed to punish Boston and cow the colonies into submission. Instead, outrage spread, binding the colonies closer. In 1774, when the First Continental Congress was summoned in Philadelphia, John Adams was chosen as one of Massachusetts' delegates. The journey south marked his first step onto a national stage. In Congress, Adams found himself among men of varying temperaments and agendas, some cautious, others fiery. He quickly emerged as a forceful presence, speaking with a bluntness that commanded attention. His belief in the necessity of resistance was unshakable, though he urged unity and strategy rather than reckless declarations. He helped draft petitions and statements that asserted colonial rights, balancing firmness with appeals to reconciliation. Yet he already sensed that reconciliation might prove a mirage. When the shots rang out at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, the possibility of compromise vanished. The Revolutionary War had begun, and Adams was thrust into the center of decisions that would determine the fate of 13 colonies. In the Second Continental Congress, his influence grew. He championed George Washington as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, recognizing that Washington's stature and Virginia origins would bind the cause beyond New England. It was a strategic choice, reflecting Adams' understanding that the war required unity more than regional pride. As war raged, Adams labored tirelessly in committees. He oversaw military affairs, devised systems of supply, and pressed for naval development. He earned a reputation as a workhorse, diligent to the point of exhaustion, often to the irritation of those who preferred deliberation over his blunt insistence on action. His temper sometimes alienated allies, yet his persistence ensured progress where others faltered. Even amid triumph, he carried the burden of responsibility. Independence was declared, but victory was far from secured. Adams accepted assignments abroad, serving on diplomatic missions to secure alliances and resources. In 1777, he traveled to France to assist Benjamin Franklin and others in negotiating support. His time in Europe revealed both his strengths and limitations. Industrious and principled, he sometimes clashed with colleagues whose subtle diplomacy contrasted with his directness. Yet his contributions were indispensable, ensuring that the fledgling United States held its place at the table of nations. By the close of 1777, Adams had journeyed from provincial lawyer to architect of revolution, from Braintree fields to the councils of empire. He had helped birth a nation through argument, persuasion, and unyielding conviction. The war would drag on, demanding more of him abroad and at home, but his place in history was already secured as one of independence's most determined champions. The revolution was not won with declarations alone. It required allies, recognition, and resources that the struggling colonies could not muster alone. For John Adams, the war years became less a matter of battlefield glory and more a test of endurance in the courts of Europe. His restless energy and uncompromising will, honed in Massachusetts, were now carried across the Atlantic to the salons and chancelleries of kings and ministers. In 1777, Adams was summoned to France to aid the American delegation already in place. He sailed with his young son, John Quincy, exposing the boy to the uncertain seas and dangers of wartime passage. The journey was arduous, and the welcome in Paris proved no less challenging. Benjamin Franklin, already a fixture at the French court, dazzled with his wit, charm, and carefully cultivated image of the humble sage from the New World. Adams, by contrast, was blunt, impatient, and uncomfortable with the courtesies of diplomacy. He valued honesty over flattery, and though respected for his intellect, he often clashed with Franklin and others who favored subtle maneuvering. The most critical mission came in 1780, when Adams was dispatched to the Netherlands. The Dutch Republic, wealthy and strategically placed, held the potential to provide loans and recognition that America desperately needed. Adams faced skepticism and resistance, yet his persistence wore down barriers. He courted bankers, merchants, and politicians, often facing cold receptions and outright hostility. But by 1782, his efforts bore fruit. The Netherlands formally recognized American independence and granted crucial loans. It was a triumph of endurance rather than elegance, the product of his dogged refusal to yield. By 1788, with the Constitution drafted and ratified at home, Adams prepared to return. His service abroad had secured recognition, alliances, and peace, but it had also tested his patience, health, and relationships. He came back to America not merely as a revolutionary, but as a statesman seasoned by the trials of diplomacy, ready to step into the uncertain experiment of governance that awaited the fledgling republic. When John Adams returned from Europe in 1788, he entered an America transformed. The revolution was over, the Constitution had been ratified, and the fragile republic awaited its first leaders. Adams, seasoned by years of service abroad, was immediately drawn into the machinery of the new government. In 1789, when the Electoral College cast its first votes, George Washington was unanimously chosen as president. Adams, finishing second, assumed the role of vice president, a position without precedent and one he found both frustrating and ambiguous. The vice presidency, as Adams soon discovered, offered little influence. He presided over the Senate, casting tie-breaking votes but holding no voice in debates. For a man of fierce intellect and opinion, the role felt like a cage. He described it bitterly as the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived. Yet, Adams took his duties seriously, shaping procedural precedents and lending the Senate a sense of decorum. He also struggled to balance loyalty to Washington with his own convictions, often finding himself at odds with emerging factions within the government. The 1790s saw the birth of America's first political parties, though Adams despised the divisiveness they created. Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, pushed for strong central government and financial systems that favored commerce and industry. Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, championed agrarian values and states' rights. In 1796, Washington declined a third term, and the presidency fell open to contest. Adams, respected as a revolutionary and diplomat, became the Federalist candidate. Jefferson, his old colleague now turned rival, led the Democratic Republicans. The election proved bitterly partisan, with pamphlets and newspapers slinging accusations. Adams entered office under the shadow of Washington's towering legacy. The nation faced challenges abroad as well as at home. Relations with France, once America's ally, had soured after the Jay Treaty with Britain, which the French viewed as betrayal. French privateers harassed American ships, and in the infamous XYZ affair of 1797, French intermediaries demanded bribes from American envoys. In 1800, Adams sought re-election but faced formidable opposition. Jefferson, allied with Aaron Burr, harnessed the growing power of the Democratic Republicans. The election was vicious and close, ultimately decided in Jefferson's favor, after a tie-forced resolution in the House of Representatives. Adams returned to Quincy, disillusioned but not broken, stepping away from the stage of politics he had long occupied. His presidency, often overshadowed by Washington and Jefferson, was marked by controversy and restraint, remembered for both missteps and the crucial avoidance of war. Yet Adams carried with him the knowledge that he had served his country as best he could, guided not by popularity but by conscience. When John Adams left the presidency in 1801, he returned not to triumph, but to seclusion. At his farm in Quincy, Massachusetts, the man who had once stood at the center of revolution and government now withdrew into private life. Though bitter over defeat and resentful of the attacks that had hounded his administration, Adams found in retirement a different rhythm, slower, quieter, yet no less meaningful. He devoted himself to farming, correspondence, and the company of Abigail, whose steady presence had always grounded him. Together, they tended the land and reflected on the tumultuous decades that had reshaped their world. Though retired, Adams did not abandon public thought. He remained an avid reader and prolific letter writer, reflecting on politics, philosophy, and history with the same candor that had defined his earlier life. His opinions often startled readers. He defended his decisions as president, critiqued emerging trends in government, and worried over the fragile balance between liberty and order. Yet the passage of years softened some of his sharpest resentments. Slowly, the bitterness of political defeat gave way to perspective, and he began to reassess his old rivalries. Their letters, spanning philosophy, government, religion, and memory, reveal two aging statesmen reflecting on a shared journey and the destiny of the nation they had helped create. What had been enmity became respect, even affection, as they wrestled with the meaning of their lives and the legacy of the Revolution. For Adams, retirement stretched long, 25 years, longer than any of his presidential peers. He lived to see his son John Quincy elected president in 1824, an achievement that filled him with pride even as his own health declined. The old patriot watched the republic mature, stumble, and evolve, knowing that he had helped lay its foundation. Visitors came to Quincy to hear his recollections, and though often infirm, Adams remained mentally vigorous, eager to share the lessons of his experience. Adams was laid to rest in Quincy beside Abigail, who had died in 1818 after a lifetime of partnership. Together they were remembered not only as political figures, but as a couple whose letters and devotion revealed the human heart behind the machinery of history. Adams' legacy, once obscured by more celebrated contemporaries, grew with time. He was remembered as a man of principle, stubborn, sometimes irascible, yet unwavering in his devotion to justice and country. He had defended unpopular causes, resisted the lure of war, and borne the burdens of office with honesty, if not always with popularity. In the end, John Adams's life traced the arc of the American story itself. Humble origins, revolutionary struggle, experiment in governance, and enduring reflection on liberty. From Braintree's fields to Philadelphia's halls, from European courts to Quincy's quiet farm, his journey embodied the contradictions and triumphs of a new nation. His voice, preserved in letters and memories, still speaks with clarity across centuries, a reminder that independence was not merely declared, but lived, with all the trials, flaws, and greatness that such a life demanded.